Canada for that matter. We still operate on UBC's infrastructure, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. This land acknowledgement is especially important considering today's topic, which is on racial inclusion practices in predominantly white workspaces. Before going into that, however, I would like to introduce PsyChi as well as today's event. We represent one of the largest international honor societies in the world with the purpose of providing academic and professional development opportunities to students. In service of this goal, we have developed the Expert Talk series, a bi-weekly event where we invite professionals in the field of psychology to share their experiences, advice, and knowledge with UBC students. Today's talk will be on an article that incites the reader to think about the power dynamics in the social environment and their place in it. And should one find themselves in a position of power over others, how to listen, understand, and empathize. If at any point you have questions about the article or presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat and we'll address them after the presentation. I would like to introduce our very first speaker of the year for the Expert Talk series and the writer of this article, Dr. Shirley Lay. Dr. Lay is actually a UBC alumnus, having graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology in 2007. She then went on to earn her Master of Education in Counseling Psychology with the University of Toronto and completed her Doctor of Psychology in Clinical Psychology at Adler University. She is now a licensed psychologist with the Oregon Board of Psychology. Without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to our amazing speaker, Dr. Shirley Lay.
Thank you, Daniel, and to the PsyChi team. It's a pleasure and honor to join everyone today on this conversation. I appreciate everyone taking time out of your schedule when you could be doing many other things right now, right? Taking time for yourself, doing your homework assignments, connecting with family and friends. So I appreciate you joining with me today in community. So today's talk is called From Survival to Finding Power, Fostering BIPOC Affirming Spaces. BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, peoples of color. When I say power, I'm not using it as, within the capitalistic sense, but I'm really talking about people's commitment and connection to their collective dreams, goals, and aspirations. I'm talking about when people live a life based on abundance, creativity, compassion, and authenticity. Like Daniel said, my name is Shirley Lay. I use she, her pronouns. I am a licensed psychologist in Oregon State in the US, and I define myself as a social justice informed clinician. Okay, so wonderful that Daniel started with a land acknowledgement because I don't personally reside in BC right now. I'm in Toronto, Ontario. I'm going to offer my own land acknowledgement. As a resident of Toronto, I'm on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. If you haven't already done so, I'd like to invite everyone to go to this website here to research the native lands that you are currently on, so that you can pay respect to the Indigenous peoples who've had to lose their lives, their culture, their ways of being as a result of European imperialism. And I invite you to not only make a verbal acknowledgement, but also feel the meaning of the words, right? And be called to action as a result of those words. I'd also like to honor the legacy of the African diaspora, paying respects to Black life, knowledge, and skills stolen as a result of white settler colonialism. I'm committed to giving honor through my work and standing up for racial justice and equity. For those folks who are interested, I want to invite you to head on over to this website here, where it talks about some of this enslavement history within Canada, within the Canadian context. Okay, so here's where I put on my social justice informed psychologist hat, and to say, you know, in addition to making a verbal commitment, we got to take actionable steps. Just because you think of things doesn't mean that you're going to enact them, right? We have to make a really intentional effort to engage in these actions. Otherwise, they're simply words. So here's a few things to ask yourself every time you review land acknowledgement or you're thinking about the native lands that you're currently on. How did you get here? Now that you're made aware of the original caretakers and those who've been marginalized because of systemic oppression, how do you plan on continuing to build solidarity and kinship with the Indigenous peoples and Black community? How do you ensure that the voices of the Indigenous and Black Canadians are amplified in your work, living, and social spaces? To what extent will the learning today benefit Indigenous and Black communities? And how will you move from acknowledgement to relationship building? So throughout the conversation today, I'm going to be giving you tons and tons of hands-on information on how you can enact some of these principles here and start answering some of these questions. If you want to get some inspiration, right, Canadian-based inspiration, there's a lot of great ones. The first one down below, looking at Indigenous corporate training. It's actually an agency that's based out of Port Coquitlam, BC, and its focus is on offering training for those who are interested in working with Indigenous groups. Next is the Black North Initiative. This is Canadian-based. It's an organization that's committed to eradicating anti-Black racism, especially within the corporate and business sector. And last one is the BIPOC Executive Search. It's based in Toronto, Ontario. It offers equity, diversity, inclusion audits, trainings, and it supports BIPOC individuals in finding work that is fulfilling and meaningful. So before we jump into the thick of things today, I want to acknowledge some of the burdens that some of you may be carrying today. Now, we are still in the thick and in the midst of a pandemic. And because of that, a lot of higher education institutions have either switched to a hybrid learning model where it's part person, part virtual. Some have even gone completely virtual, depriving you of a lot of the social interactions that you all need to flourish, to grow, develop, and to just expand your personhood. And because of physical distancing measures, some of you may have already lost opportunities to celebrate important milestones, like graduations, like birthdays, like weddings, right? And with significant people in your life. And the pandemic has also brought on quite a bit of economic instability. And as a result, some of you may be experiencing financial hardship, wondering how you're going to pay your tuition. Also, there might be some uncertainty about job prospects after graduation. So it is very likely that even though you may not be affected by all these things, you are likely to be affected by some things. And as a result, you're living with a lot of stress. An extremely stressed brain, extremely frayed nervous system makes it really hard to learn, right? So if some of you are sitting in class going, I'm not retaining, I'm not following, I don't get it, I don't feel as motivated. These are some of the reasons for why it's so hard to engage in your studies at this time. And I want to say, whatever you're holding on today, all of it is welcome. And do whatever it takes, right? Here are some suggestions of things on this list to help you stay safe, to help you self-preserve, and to take care of yourself. We will be talking about racial and race-based related issues. And so with that topic, it will always come with a charge, right? So listen to your bodies. When it says too much, listen to it and do whatever it takes to keep your body safe, however it needs to be done. So I want to start off with this slide here. I want everyone to be mindful of my positionality, my social positionality, right? So these are my social and identity markers. They'll influence the perspective that I bring today. On the left-hand column, as you can see, I've listed all my areas of marginalization, right? That means that in these cultural contexts, they're often the ones that are not made with me in mind or expected me to be there, okay? There's a lot of times when I had to check myself, check these parts of myself at the door before I entered a room, just so that I could be accepted, valued, liked, etc. So identify in terms of areas of marginalization, being Chinese, Mexican, a woman, English is my second language, first in the family to attend college. I never thought of that as an area of marginalization until actually only a few years ago, right? Growing up, doing my undergrad, doing my master's, I've always thought of myself as somebody who had to work double or triple harder than anyone else because of a lack of intelligence, because of a lack of ability, right? But now I understand that if I'm the first in my family to navigate higher education, it puts me at a disadvantage compared to someone who comes from a family who is multi-generational and have been through the higher education system over the span of many years. I also grew up in a working class family. My mom only received up to grade 6 of formal education, and my dad some high school. In terms of areas of privilege on the right-hand side, right, this is also an area, this is also an important column that I need to highlight. These are the parts of my identities that I rarely, if at all, think about, right? It never comes first. And I never have to wonder if the laws will determine whether or not I can get married to my partner, whether or not I have access to resources to even enter a building, right? And I can disclose all of these aspects of my identity freely, knowing that my life will not be in danger, knowing that I'm not going to be attacked on the street, knowing that I won't be devalued or rejected, and I never have to defend any of these identities. So in today's conversation, I'm going to be speaking largely from my political identity. I identify as being a woman of color, and I do that on purpose. I say that on purpose as a signaling, right, to who I'm interacting with, that I understand where I'm at in terms of the social hierarchy in this Western world. I understand the types of people who are at the very top and who's at the very bottom. Right. So in the Western context, we're looking at folks who are white, cis, straight, male identifying, able-bodied, middle class, owning class. And then the bottom, right, in the Canadian context, we have Indigenous folks, Black folks, who are at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, right? And then for myself, I'm somewhere in between. So I think it's important for folks to know that this is the lens that I bring, right? And so the insights that I bring today may not be relevant to every single person, right? And that's okay. You don't have to take them. Take the pieces that do resonate with you. People who have a different combination of these social markers, social identities, may have different opinions on what inclusion might look like. Also, the work of social justice is constantly evolving, it's dynamic, it's ever changing. And so what I say today may not be relevant tomorrow. Okay, so I want to invite everyone to review these two columns. I'm going to take you through it slowly, so just follow along with me. So these are two columns. They are reflective of different ways of understanding, organizing, and navigating our experiences in the Western world, right? Whether it be in Canada or in the US. Now, after I read through these two columns, have an answer in your mind. Do we live in the first column or do we live in the second column? Do we live in the left column or the right column? So just have a vague idea in your mind. So in the left column, this is how these folks live. There can be many truths. Truths are dependent upon individual experiences, juxtaposed with there's only one truth based on science and the law. Back to the first column, feeling comfortable is measured by the quality of your relationships with people. The right-hand column says feeling comfortable is related to how successful you feel you've been achieving your goals. Back to the left column, society operates in a state of relatedness. Everything and everyone is related. There's a belief that people, objects, and the environment are all connected. Law, kinship, and spirituality reinforce this connectedness. Identity comes from connection. Right-hand column says compartmentalized society, emphasis on individualism, which means the individual over the collective. People are loosely linked. Privacy and boundaries are maintained. Lastly, on the left column, it says the land is sacred. on the right column, the land and its resources should be available for development and extraction for the benefit of humans. Okay. So have an answer in your mind. Do we live, right, in the Canadian context or US context, do we live in the left column or the right column? We live in the right column, okay? And so this chart essentially sums up my thesis for today, right? If you are an Indigenous individual who come from a culture, also not just from an Indigenous worldview, but other cultures as well that are more communal based, collaborative based, right? Relationship oriented. You engage in this world using your senses, and you base your judgment based on values. You're more likely to feel deficient when you're living in the Canadian or US context, right? You're more likely to be regarded as inferior, less than, inadequate. You might be otherized, right? Someone who doesn't belong or even rejected. So this is the whole premise of our conversation today is we live in the Western worldview, right? The right-hand column. How do we make sure that folks in the left-hand column, Indigenous, Black folk, people of color, how do we make sure those folks feel included? How do we make sure that they have access to their inner power, have access to their potential, and can feel a sense of belongingness and inclusion in the spaces that they're in? If we're constantly measuring their value based on this Western worldview, they will always be regarded as deficient. Okay. So for those of you who are interested in, this is an adapted version of what is part of the Indigenous Corporate Training blog. For those of you who are interested in other aspects of comparison between Indigenous worldview and Western worldview, please go to that website here. And that website will also link you to another article that talks about it in more detail. Okay, so some of you may have already come up with this model, right? This is Pamela Hayes' work on the addressing model, okay? This is an acronym that helps people understand or remember the various identity markers that a person can carry. Now, Nieto and Boyer took it one step further and helped us clarify the people who occupy the agent rank, right? This is the dominant rank, the advantaged group, and those who occupy the target rank, or the disadvantaged, the marginalized, the underserved group. With respect to age, so I'm going to go through this diagram here. In the first column, it talks about age. Adults, right? Those who are 18 to 64 are prized in today's society. Whereas those who are children, adolescents, elders, they're often in inferior status, meaning this world was not created for them or with them in mind or expected them to be here. Disability is the next one. Able-bodied persons are advantaged, and those with disabilities are disadvantaged. In terms of religion, those who are Christians, agnostics, and atheists are privileged, whereas those who are Jews, Muslims, and all non-Christian groups are regarded as inferior. This is where anti-Semitism, this is where Islamic phobia comes in. Ethnicity, Euro-Americans, those who have European ancestry are prized, and people of color are regarded as subordinate too. Right, always in comparison to the white body, right? The white body is seen as standard, and then everybody is compared to them and evaluated based on their ability to match the standard of the white standard. A very simple example of that would be colorism, right? In a lot of cultures, especially in the East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian cultures, there's a lot of active agents to whiten skin color, right, as an attempt to match up to the white standard of beauty, right? The fairer one is, the more beautiful one is. In terms of social class, owning or middle class, if you have access to higher education, that's an area of privilege. Those who are poor, working class, are subordinate too. Sexual orientation, those who identify straight, again, don't have to worry in this world about whether or not they're going to be attacked for holding their partner's hands. Those who identify as gay, lesbian, bi, even those who are asexual, right? Ace peoples. Apparently, they're not allowed to exist in this world, right? There's this constant questioning of, are you sure? Do you really know that that's how you identify? In terms of Indigenous background, right? Non-natives are advantaged. Those who are Indigenous to the land are often forgotten. They're the voiceless. National origin, this is a US model, so it says US born, but if you are Canadian born, if you have citizenship, that's an area of privilege. Those who are immigrants, refugees, are in a more precarious situation, and that they have to follow certain rules, do certain paperwork, pay certain dues in order to be allowed to live in the Canadian context. Very simple example, international students, they have to pay how much more to get their education here. Gender, males are privileged. Those who are female, I wouldn't use the term transgendered, I would drop the ED, right? Those who are transgender, those who are trans, intersex, those are in disadvantaged situations in our Western cultural lens. So while the conversation today will be focused on peoples from racialized backgrounds, right? I've highlighted ethnicity, Indigenous background. We need to be mindful that people don't just carry one identity marker, right? I'm not just one of these things. I'm an assortment of these identities, right? And these identities intersect. So for example, in the Canadian context, a person of refugee status is likely to be a person of color. There's a good chance that they may be suffering from trauma-based issues and living with very limited financial means, right? So that's what I mean in terms of the intersecting nature of these identities. So for all the recommendations I'm offering today, make sure you are examining the appropriateness of it using an intersectional lens, right? The term intersectionality has been coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an activist and also legal scholar. And she has examined experiences of those who are multiply minoritized, right? Where marginalizations are compounded and influence one another. The more target identities, the disadvantaged, the marginalized identities that you carry, the more difficult it is to secure your basic needs, the easier it is to lose these basic human rights, and the less represented you are in society. So for example, if you are a person of color living with a disability and you identify as being queer, and you are of immigrant status, it is very, very unlikely that you're going to have your needs met in the Canadian-US context. Meaning that you're not going to see a lot of people who look like you, who act like you, and you're not going to see a lot of people who understand some of the unique challenges that you face. So I want folks to keep that in mind. Okay. So next I'm going to talk about how do we take this theory, all this theory, and apply it to action. I put the slide up again to remind folks that we live in the blue bracket, right? Everything that I'm going to talk about next is about how do we offer a counter narrative? How do we ensure that people who don't come from this background feel that they're included, that there's a sense of belongingness? Just because you include a marginalized person, you know, just because there's numerical representation does not mean that your environment is inclusive, right? And I think for a lot of folks who come from various cultures know this. There's so much nuance in our culture. And sometimes it's a burden, right? It's a burden to have to even explain. So then we just acculturate, we adapt, and we go, okay, forget it, doesn't matter. I can be my most Asian self when I'm at home. But then at work, I got to put that aside, right? Okay, so theory to action. Here are areas of work that I think psychologists can engage in. Unfortunately, I didn't get this information in my undergrad degree. All I got was you get your doctorate in psychology and you do research. And because you do research, you probably have to teach. So I didn't really get any other mentorship about areas of intervention, right? What I can do as a psychologist. And even today, even though I listed a few things here today, I'm still exploring how can I apply myself as a psychologist. Okay, so a lot of writing here, but I'm going to take you through this. So first of all, I want to talk about assessment, right? So assessment is about doing psychodiagnostic testing, which includes intellectual testing, personality, aptitude, achievement, in order to see if somebody meets a diagnosable condition that's based on the DSM-5. So this is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Now, as part of the dominant narrative, if we're just reviewing the first section there, psychology is really based on Western ideology, right? Mental health issues are medicalized, which means that we put a great emphasis on the biological and physiological influences of mental health conditions. We often think that faulty brain structures and functioning is the result of or leads to depression or anxiety. We think that disease can be observed, measured, described, and as a result, we use medication. And some of you might have experienced this already, but I used to, I did practicum at a chronic pain clinic. And if some of you are aware of some of the chronic pain literature, there's not a lot of it in that medical practitioners still don't really know how to treat chronic pain because you can't see it. It's based on subjective reporting. And so what happens is that these folks, they go through the medical system, they go, okay, there's nothing functionally, organically wrong with you, so let's just bring you to the psychologist and let the psychologist deal with it. And then the psychologist will try to pick you apart, and they go, can't really, identify specifically what it is that is going on for you. So let's just give you the template treatment. Let's just give you the treatment that we think is evidence-based, based on protocol, right? Policy. We'll just give you that. And if you're not responding, there's something wrong with you, right? This speaks to some of the individualistic nature of mental illness diagnosis, is that these diagnoses indicate that the problem lies within you and that you are ultimately responsible for your health and functioning. If you are not able to apply these interventions that we psychologists as experts prescribe to you, then you're either not working hard enough, or you are lying about your symptoms, or you're a lost cause. So so there's not much more that we can do for you, right? So that's the model that we work from in terms of diagnosis. My recommendation is to offer the counter narrative, right? So I asked the question of, is a diagnosis necessary? So in the past 3 settings that I've been at, we didn't need to charge a person's health insurance for treatment. So most of the time I didn't offer a diagnosis because it just wasn't necessary. I didn't need it for funding. I didn't need it for resources. I might use it to help me create a plan, right? To understand the constellation of their symptoms, to help me understand how I might intervene with this person. But do I need to formally give this person a diagnosis? It just wasn't necessary. And so I often don't offer diagnosis. And especially for marginalized folks, right? For those folks who I said who are multiply minoritized, I said, forget it. I'm not going to offer you a diagnosis because the problem doesn't lie within you. The problem is that sociopolitically, there's something wrong with the environment that you're living in. And now I'm not going to buy into the story of labeling you as deficient, right? But when it came to this person needing a certain resource and they need me to offer a diagnosis, then I'll do it. But this conversation that I'm having with you all today, I often have it with my clients to tell them why I might offer a diagnosis and why I don't. Right? And so this is part of involving a client into your diagnostic process, really collaborating with them, acknowledging how undignifying it is to have to be labeled as deficient in order to get a certain resource, right? And how dehumanizing it is. It just strips away your entire personhood, right? It strips away all the complexity of your personhood, that you're just this one depressed person who's ill and deficient and needs a certain resource. And then also educate yourself on different racial identity development models, educate yourself on different structural determinants of health, immerse yourself in various theories of human power dynamics and its influence on health and well-being. I listed some major players in the field. Again, I named off these folks based on my own social positionality. Okay, so your heroes may be a different group of people, and I would love to hear that too. But these people, I've immersed myself in their work, and I think they give a really good perspective on some of the things that I covered today. Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit quicker now, mindful of the time. In terms of intervention, right? So these are the strategies, these are the ways of healing people as part of our dominant narrative, right? Our Western framework. We deliver, right? Whatever you learn in psychology today, the fact, the term psychology, please be mindful that there are two words missing in front of the word psychology. What we practice here is Western colonial psychology. You never get taught that, right? You only get taught this is psychology, it applies to everyone, it's generalizable, and if it's not generalizable, let's tweak it a little bit and make it work. But we never work from the ground up, right? We never go, okay, let's start with Indigenous worldview first, and then we talk about healing. It's always, let's start with the term psychology, and again, that's Western colonial psychology, and then we try to adapt it. So again, this is very Eurocentric models of human development. Assumptions are universalistic. It's very individual based, right? That's why a lot of times psychological work is done in these little small private rooms, just you and the therapist. And it often examines Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color from a deficient lens. I'm not going to touch too much about that. I got some of the citations in there, and you're more than welcome to read into it to understand why folks have been subordinated as a result of Western psychology. So the counter narrative, right? I'm going to jump right into this. This is my favorite stuff. This is stuff that I did not learn in undergrad. In fact, I did not learn this until the last 3 years of my, I wouldn't even say training, right? So the last 3 years I was in pre-doc and in postdoc, then I got my first job. So again, like not even within my educational program. So some of the work of some of these folks are just brilliant. It just blew my mind because it doesn't start with Western psychology first. It starts with Latinx psychology. I didn't even know that existed. It started with Black psychology. It started with Indigenous psychology. It started from that first, right, and building up. So I'm not going to go through each of these. I've got citations. So you're more than welcome to look into it. The one that I will highlight is womanist and mujerista psychologies. I just recently got into this, right? I used to identify myself as being feminist oriented, valuing relationships, community, and feminine energy. Then I found out about these two approaches, and it counters to mainstream feminism, which often represents the needs of white women, right? And it forgets those who are women of color, women with disabilities, women with who are single parents, women who are suffering from economic hardship, right? It forgets all those peoples. And so these two perspectives will help, I think, round out some of the theoretical models that you might be learning in undergrad. You might learn about, you will learn about cognitive behavioral therapy. You will learn about psychodynamic therapies, humanistic therapies. Again, these are therapies that were developed by older white men. If you are not an older white man, these therapies may not apply to you. And I think that's why I struggled so hard in my undergrad, my master's, a little bit of my doctorate, why it didn't feel good. Like I'll do the CBT, I'll do it, but it something in my body says it doesn't completely fit. Right. And then I also talked about really decenter individualistic counseling models and understand individual within systems. Right. I labeled some theorists there who will help you bring a more holistic lens. Right. In psychology, we talk a lot about psychosocial determinants of health, but we never learn about the structural determinants of health. Right. How healthy is your community, your neighborhood, your police systems, your legal systems, your society in general, and how does that influence health and healing? We don't talk about that because, again, we come from a very individualistic lens. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this in detail, but I will leave the slide here, and I will make these slides overall available to the team here so that you can disseminate it. A lot of you might be going down the research path. Here are some indicators of what the dominant narrative looks at in research, and then I also offered a counter narrative to that. Essentially, long story short, we need to humble ourselves. I know this is called an expert series. I think I can only call myself an expert in my own life. That's why I had one of those slides that talked about these are my social positionalities. This is where I come from. If you like it, take it. If not, you can put it aside. I'm okay with that. Okay, education. This blew my mind too, but I'm not going to cover it. Is that for some reason, when you're a researcher, you're being asked to teach, and yet there's no instruction on how to, there's no instruction that informs your pedagogy, right? There's no instruction that informs how to be a good professor or effective professor. How do you convey information in a way that is conducive to student needs and learning? I want to encourage you to look into Laura Rendon's work on contemplative pedagogy. She made the simplest statement, treat your students as if they're human beings, right? Don't treat them as receptacles of intellectual knowledge. Really develop their inner world, right? Help them develop their internal sense of right and wrong. Help them to develop a sense of efficacy, right? Confidence in their ability to learn. They have tons of wisdom, right? You all students have tons of wisdom in terms of your ancestral history, your familial history, cultural history. So much of that can be brought to the table. And I don't take the excuse of, oh, we're teaching STEM, so we don't really need, your lifespan development. That is so wrong. A couple of years ago, I helped an institution and helped some faculty members comb through their syllabus to ensure that there's an inclusive lens, to ensure that we were talking about actually consent across curriculum, right? To empower people to have control and say over their bodies. And even in STEM, there was a way for us to talk about things at a cellular level in terms of connectedness and how to relate to one another, right? So if you really put your mind to it and put work into it, you can apply many of these principles that I taught today into curriculum. And lastly, some of the best skills that I developed in the past couple of years is consultation skills. Again, I mentioned a little bit earlier about how I help look through policies, practices, and procedures. one of the last very memorable projects that I did was we had the outdoor programming folks who said, hey, how come our BIPOC students are not coming outdoors with us? They're not coming on nature walks with us. They're not going on hikes with us. Like, can you look through our curriculum to see why? And then I, offered them some of these questions. And then I brought in Indigenous worldviews and I said, are you doing these things? Often the answer is no, right? Again, working from a Western framework first and then tweaking it. I say, don't do that. Just throw out the entire model, start from the ground up and build. If you are interested in some of these questions that I listed here, it might make you sound really smart, actually. If you go into an organization, agency, if you're volunteering even, or if you're part of a student group and you ask one of these questions, it might blow some people's minds because we don't ask these questions a lot. And if you want more of these questions, just head on over to the citation I offered. Okay, that's it. I went over time because I promised that I'm going to leave lots of time for Q&A, and then I also received a set of questions about my professional background that I agreed to answering. So I'm going to give time for that. Let's stay in community. Here's my email. Here's my LinkedIn. I also, again, linked the work that has already been sent to all of you. And then lastly, in terms of works, I am building a private practice right now called Collective Rising Psychology Center. Maybe a little bit obvious why I named it that. But basically, I want to create a healing space for BIPOC folks, right? Where we can heal one another. We can use different modalities, unconventional modalities, and also do some consultation and advising work as well. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lei, for that amazing, fascinating, and eye-opening presentation, and for raising so many important points, which is especially important when talking about higher education and opportunities. As you said, our social intersectionality, our identity, and our potential agent or target ranks will be an important factor when we continue to pursue our dreams. With that in mind, let's please transition to the questions from our audience about your clinical psychology degree. We have some slides here. Our first question is, when did you know you wanted to pursue a clinical psychology degree?
So I knew not in first year, not in second year. In fact, I didn't know what the heck I was doing in undergrad. But in my third year in a health psychology class, I don't know if she's still there, at Dr. Anita DeLongis. And in her health psych class, I was reading a textbook and I still have this like flashbulb like memory of the event where it talked about different avenues a psychologist can pursue. And one of them was in clinical and counseling psychology. So from then on, I was like, oh, let me research into this. And yeah, so in my third year of studies, I would say.
Thank you so much. And then the next question is, what resources did you use in your undergrad that really helped you transition to clinical psychology?
So it's a big step from undergrad to clinical psychology. It's a really big step because there's all these little steps along the way. But the first few steps that I would probably recommend is for folks to join psychology groups, just like this one, because I joined a psychology group and it got me connected to like-minded students, right? We were nerdy, we talked about psychology. We also exchanged ideas on different ways of applying our work, our knowledge. It was also within the psychology group that I got access to psych jobs postings. And so, yeah, join psychology group. The next piece is, and you probably get this a lot, is to join a lab. Get some research under your belt. I define myself as a scholar practitioner rather than a scientist practitioner. And the difference is that a scientist practitioner heavy emphasis on research, right? Conducting your own research, and then you're applying it. For myself, as you can see from my presentation here, I love consuming research and then figuring how to apply it. And I think that's important because I think that's often the missing link with the masses, right? A lot of people who don't have access to higher education don't even have access to these articles that we're reading. And let's say they have access, they're not going to read it because it's very dense. There's a lot of scientific jargon in there. So I think it's my job to translate, right? Not just word translation, but cultural translation, right? How do I ensure that the masses get to enjoy these resources? And then finding as many volunteer opportunities as possible that's psychology related. And I'm saying, you know, you don't need to be doing therapy. You could be sweeping the floors of a psychology clinic, which was what I did. You know, I said, I don't care what I do. I for some reason, I know I need to be in this clinic so I can be around psychologists. And it's through those opportunities that you get to land to your next opportunities. But if you are interested in clinical work, I would say Vancouver Crisis Center, volunteer at those agencies. I volunteered at Mood Disorders Association, at local hospitals, right, offering companion care. So anything that's just even remotely related, right, anything that's human interaction related, compassion oriented, engage in those so that you're building the blocks necessary to get to eventually engage in clinical work.
Amazing response. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Getting your foot in the door in any way possible is just amazing advice. As for the next question, what did you do after your bachelor's? Did you go straight for your master's or did you get some work experience first?
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't go straight into my master's. Again, because of my first, you know, I'm first in the family to go to college. So I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Like, even though I got my undergrad degree, I didn't know what I was going to do with it after. And there's always the stereotype that after a psych degree, you go work at Starbucks. I don't know if it's still relevant anymore, but back in 2007, that was a joke. I would tell people, you know, I'm a psychology major, and they're like, oh, you're gonna work at Starbucks. Funny enough, the work is so hard now that I'm like, oh, I actually want to go work in, you know, food and service. So after my bachelor's, I did make my first attempt to apply to master's program at UBC, right, the Masters of Counseling. But I kind of knew I wasn't going to get in because my portfolio was really thin still. But I was just like, oh, okay, I'm just going to try. If I don't get in, that's okay. And I didn't apply to any other schools because I wanted to stay local for financial reasons. And then during that time, remember the psychology clinic I talked about that I was sweeping floors at and wiping tables? They then said, hey, do you want to do some psychological testing for us? And I was like, yeah. So then they hired me. After I volunteered to do administrative work, you know, photocopying, buying coffee, things like that. And then I moved up to psychological testing, right? So that was when the director took me under his wing and then really taught me the ropes of things. And so, you know, I did a year of that and I was like, hey, making my second attempt at UBC, I also applied to U of T. I might have applied to other schools. I think I did. I don't remember which ones, but those were the two most memorable. Thinking like, oh, UBC, I got this. I worked at a psychology clinic. I had some lab experience. Like, I got some my portfolio looks much more stacked now. And I still didn't get in. And I don't know if this person's still there, but the administrative person, you know, whenever I tried to ask her, hey, can you give me some feedback on, you know, how I can improve myself the next time? She's like, no, we don't do that here.
Oh my.
I was like, okay, so like, didn't know why I didn't get in. But I got into U of T. And I said, you know what, UBC, whatever. I got into U of T, so I'm going to go there. Even though I had to bite the bullet in terms of finances, it's a lot more because I was living at home during my undergrad. And so then I had to, pay more for living expenses at U of T. And also in Toronto, things are a lot more expensive here. Education, anything you purchase, there's an additional tax. So yeah, that was when I did my master's degree. And my recommendation is, again, this is based on my positionality. If for financial reasons, you may not want to go straight into your master's, right? Because you're in a financial deficit for many years, right? So if you go from undergrad, which is 4 or 5 years, and then another 2 3 years of master's degree, like 8 years out, no income coming in, it may not be a suitable thing for you. And also, I think for myself, getting more life experience, getting more wisdom, right? For me, wisdom is different from knowledge. Knowledge is like intellectual knowledge, but wisdom is how do you use that knowledge? Have you digested it? Have you integrated it into your personhood? Have you understood the complexities of this world and know how to apply information, not in a black and white way, right? In a very, like, work within the gray zone and be able to balance conflicting, opposing perspectives. That's wisdom, right? Do you have that capacity to go into a master's program to then appear as a competent individual, right? Because you are vouching for yourself to be a healer. You're saying, I'm interested in healing people. And so I think having a few more years of work experience will make you more competitive when you apply for practicum positions. So practicum positions, you know, you got to do practicum in your master's and in your doctorate, and you apply for them as if they were a job, like a job where you don't get paid. and that you have to pay for the transportation costs, right? So if you have more years of experience, then you have more bargaining power, I would say.
What a tough road you've just described for us. Do your best, psych undergrads that are here with us in the Zoom call. In the interest of time, I think we should go with the Zoom question that came from one of the audience members. As you were realizing how Western-focused psychology and psychological interventions tend to be, did you find it challenging to find other students who felt the same way, or other teachers who validated that experience or feeling?
That's such a good question. Yeah, thank you for the audience member who asked that. So I went to Adler University, which is a university that's based out of Chicago, but there's a satellite school in Vancouver, British Columbia. You folks might have heard of it already. It's a social justice oriented school. So, you know, when I first went in, I naively thought that social justice meant give to the poor. That is seriously what I thought. You know, that's it. I didn't, everything that talks about here, no, I didn't know any of this. So I was lucky enough that I was part of a cohort of 15 of people who are from like diverse ages, professional backgrounds, abilities, ethno-cultural backgrounds. And so are at a major university, research funded, the Western lens is going to be emphasized. I'm going to make that assumption. I might be wrong though, and I'm happy to be proved wrong. And please let me know if I'm wrong, and let me know which institution this is so that I can vouch for this institution. But if you think about it, right, all higher education institutions are built on stolen lands. And it starts from there. and then, you know, the white settlers, colonizers who came over, they were fleeing from something, right? They were fleeing from religious persecution. They were intent on appropriating things. And so that is where our education comes from, right? It comes from that lens. And so I've worked at 3 institutions already, past 3 years, and they've all been like that. And so it's about finding your tribe, finding your people. Actively looking for people who speak the language that you are interested in speaking, and that allows you to live your most authentic life. And having that strong group of people, having a sense of community is biggest in terms of ensuring that you are educating yourself in a model in a way that is more conducive to diverse folks and to the global majority, right? So people of color are part of the global majority. Are you educating yourself in a way where you can just deliver treatment to weird populations, right? Which is the acronym of Western, educated, industrialized, rich democratic nations. Are you going to be a clinician who can just focus on treating those people? If you're not interested in that, then you know, I've offered some indicators of people that you should follow on social media, on Facebook, to educate yourself on their work.
Thank you so much. Incredible answer. And we'll just, since we only have time for one more question, I think one of the most interesting questions, especially for someone who deals primarily in BIPOC issues, what self-care practices do you use to overcome difficult days or difficult clients?
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding some of the values that your family and your culture bring, using the breath to ground oneself, reminding oneself that our ancestors have done a great deal to fight for our rights, to fight for our needs, and so it is okay if we want to pass on the baton to someone else while we rest, and then take up the baton when we can engage in the work again. And rest in that sense is viewed from a positive perspective, right? It's act of resistance, act of revolution to rest. So I would say is connecting to your ancestral history, coming into community as much as possible. So finding like-minded folks, engaging in a lot of body work. I reference Resmaa Menakem's book. He talks a lot about somatic or body strategies to help you stay grounded, to soothe and regulate your nervous system. So I would engage in, self-care, or what I call self-preservation, from that angle.
Thank you so much. And that is our time for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Lay, for answering all of our questions, for the amazing presentation. And thank you to everyone who came to our first event. I know it's midterm season, so it really means a lot that you guys took the time to participate today. The Expert Talk series is a bi-weekly event, so stay tuned for more information about all the exciting professionals we have lined up for you. Our next event will be on November 30th, where we will be inviting sports psychologist Dr. Zarina Giannoni to talk about research and training in her field. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Dr. Lay, for the amazing presentation, and have an awesome day. Thanks, guys.